When you think of crops that were grown in colonial America, what crops do you think of? There was a crop, a cash crop, that was grown that earned more money than tobacco, more money than cotton, is called indigo. And from about the 1740s up to the American Revolution, indigo was a big money earner for Southern plantation owners, especially in South Carolina. Indigo is a plant and it's a color because the plant is the source of a dye. That dye gives a very rich, deep, beautiful, brilliant blue color, and this is the scientific name for it. It requires a wet and hot and sort of more tropical environment to thrive. This is a plant that did and does thrive in much of West Africa. The people there have cultivated and used this blue color for generations. According to Adair African Textiles, indigo was the foundation of numerous textile traditions throughout West Africa. For centuries before the introduction of synthetic dyes, the ability to transform everyday white cotton into prized deep blue cloth was a mysterious and highly valuable skill, passed on by specialist dyers from generation to generation. From the Tuareg nomads of the Sahara to the grassland kingdoms of Cameroon, indigo cloth signified wealth, abundance, and fertility. A century ago, blue and white striped cloth was the normal attire across vast areas from Senegal to Cameroon, while numerous traditions of shibori-type resist pattern dyeing flourished. It was women who dyed cloth with indigo in most areas. Yoruba dyers paid tribute to a patron deity called Iya Mapo to ensure the success of the complex dye process. So how did indigo become one of the top earning cash crops in South Carolina during the 1700s? I think you know where we're going with this. I don't think that we often enough acknowledge the skills and the ancestral knowledge that was also extracted from Africa and brought here through the transatlantic slave trade. Indigo is a complex plant, first of all. You have to know how to cultivate it. You have to know when to harvest it. You have to know how to extract the dye. It is a complex fermentation process. It's a chemical process. You have to have certain chemicals that you have to know how to also get from your environment. And this is not knowledge that white plantation owning colonists from Europe just generally had. It was the people they stole from Africa who brought that knowledge. I find it very interesting that there are several places that we can still see and recognize the influence of that color on American society, even to this day. What do you think of when I show you this cloth? Well, first of all, I can tell you that we are looking at the color of indigo. I'm sure that this is a synthetic dye, but the synthetic dye is replicating the color that could have been gotten from indigo. You might say that it's denim. You might recognize it as material that is used for jeans. This is very old cloth, and it's older than Levi Strauss. Let's be very clear about that. The American fashion community was born from the inception of indigo slave plantations in America. Indigo was the hidden commodity of the slave trade before cotton. The first indigo-dyed hemp clothing was the uniform of the enslaved called, quote, Negro cloth, and deemed unfit for anyone to wear but the enslaved Black, Indigenous American, and enslaved African people. This would have been used for workwear, and it would have only been suitable to be worn by enslaved people. So how did we end up with jeans that we all wear, some of us practically daily? Well, Levi Strauss did not invent jeans. Jeans were certainly already a thing. He did put rivets on the pants, and the other thing he did was advertise his pants as the only jeans that were made exclusively from white labor. So, Levi Strauss was a racist. Indigo was not just used for pants. It was also used for, jumpsuits, that we would call them today overalls, and also work shirts. A lot of manual laborers, physical manual laborers, would wear these shirts that were dyed blue with indigo. And those shirts had collars. You could even say it was a blue collar shirt. There is, of course, another place that some of us daily might see that indigo blue color that came from Africa. And that is, I'm going to leave the United States flag right there in the background. And when you look at that blue, I want you to remember where that came from. Because if you are an American and you live in the United States, that's not just Black history. That is American history. And it shouldn't be forgotten. And it certainly should not be erased. If you're interested in learning more about indigo, I highly recommend this book right here. It is called Indigo, In Search of the Color That Seduced the World by Catherine E. McKinley. Excellent read. In my antique textile collection, which is small but growing, I have a coverlet. This is a traditional American coverlet. The background that you see, that sort of beigey white color, that is cotton, and the blue, possibly dyed from indigo, that blue color is wool. Wool and cotton in one textile. We might think of colonial America when we look at a textile like this. We might also think of Appalachia, where the tradition of weaving these in some places is still being carried on and has survived to this very day. But something that I didn't know until, of course, I researched and learned about it, is that these coverlets were also something that would have been woven by enslaved labor in southern states. And as a spinner myself, I just want to emphasize that spinning is hard work, and it requires practice and knowledge and skill. It's labor, but it's skilled labor. This is a picture of a coverlet that was hand woven in northeastern Alabama, and I don't know if you can tell, but this is the width of the loom, and then you would take two lengths of it and stitch it down the center to make it wide enough. You can see that was done on the coverlet I have as well. You can see that stitched down the center. This is where the pane ends and where it's stitched to the other one. And you can see that the width of it is about the width of my loom that I have here. I call her Tina, the loom, not the blanket. That's how you would get a piece of cloth that was wide enough to be a coverlet, because this would be the cover on a bed. I have a couple book recommendations for you. A lot of people think of these coverlets as being from Appalachia, and that's true. The tradition of these coverlets is still holding on in Appalachia. This is a book that was written by Frances Louisa Goodrich, who was an Appalachian weaver. This book is called Mountain Homespun. But these coverlets were also woven by a lot of enslaved labor in the South. And a book that is heart-wrenching but incredibly important is called Plantation Slave Weavers Remember: An Oral History by Mary Madison. This book was taken from oral histories that were recorded during the 1930s under the Federal Writers Project. They began documenting oral histories of former slaves. This effort was expanded, resulting in a collection of more than 10,000 pages of interviews and photographs of former slaves and children of slaves. The vast collection is housed in the Library of Congress. I'm going to need someone to check on the Library of Congress. It's rarely examined by the general public. And Mary Madison did the work of going through those histories to find specific descriptions that reflected daily life on plantations relative to weaving, spinning, knitting, and dyeing. And these narratives offer a glimpse into the lives of enslaved African Americans and offer testimony not only to their involvement in these crafts, but to the resilience and insistence of the human spirit to prevail. Incredible, just incredible oral history that is captured in this book. I can count on one hand the number of times that I have said, I want this thing that I can only find at an antique store probably, so I'm going to go antiquing until I find it, and then walk into the very first store and find it. I wanted a washing board for talking about this because I think this is just such a good visual. And you've seen me wearing this, historic kind of costume, and I want you to just imagine washing the type of voluminous skirt that I'm wearing on a washing board and having to lift wet clothing and stir, big pots of boiling water and cleaning soaps and detergents and scrubbing clothes on a washboard like this. Just want to keep that in mind while we talk about our next story, because laundry is a chore no one has loved ever. I have a pile of clothes upstairs in my bedroom right now that haven't been folded, and so at some point I gave up and started calling it my comfort laundry because it's just in a pile, and I can work with that because there's like strata. In Atlanta in 1881, there was a conflict between the washerwomen and the Atlanta, the mayor and the Atlanta local government. So here's what was going on. In 1881, of course, people still remember the Civil War. That was just barely, 2 decades prior. And Atlanta was rebuilding, trying to show off that they were a city that was a beautiful city to come and visit and do things, and that their local industry and their local agriculture had recovered from the Civil War, which was devastating. So at this time, you had Black people who were employed to do domestic labor. And a lot of the white people in the city did not want to pay for these services to be done. They still, I guess, remembered a time when they weren't having to pay for these things to be done, and the Black women who were the washing women wanted to, quote, make enough money to live comfortably. That's all. That's all they wanted. They just wanted to be paid. So here's what happened. This is so petty and I just love it. They would return clothes if they weren't being paid. They would return the clothes, the laundry, with stains still on it. And sometimes they would return the clothes still wet. Now, I just want you to imagine the level of petty that it takes to haul a load of laundry across Atlanta in the heat, carrying it yourself because, they're not gonna, there's just no cars yet. To your house to get it all wet and then load it back up again and get it back across the city to deliver it and return it wet. I think that's a wonderfully petty thing to do. And I applaud that, because if you're not being paid for your work, then return the laundry wet. So the women wanted to be paid, and they stopped doing laundry at some point, not just returning it wet, but just not taking clients, not doing the laundry. This was reported in the Atlanta Constitution on July 26th, 1881. It said, quote, "The washerwomen's strike is assuming vast proportions, and despite the apparent independence of the white people, is causing quite an inconvenience among our citizens." I'd like to know who wrote that. Does it mean the same thing then as it does now? Because I also see that as quite a petty sentiment to say, despite the apparent independence of the white people, like they're mad they can't get their laundry done. Pay for it. It's simple. So there are some families in Atlanta who have been unable to have any washing done for more than 2 weeks. Not only the washerwomen, but the cooks, house servants, and nurses are asking increases in wages. That's the end of the quoted article. So, of course, as what happens when people strike because they want more wages and the people in control of the wages don't want to pay the wages, the police are called and arrests start to be made. People were being charged exorbitant fees for, whatever disruption charges they were being charged with. And when they couldn't pay those fees, they were put on chain gangs. So I want to, also say that, like, this is pre-labor union stuff. Like, the labor unions were just starting. But this was before most of that. There certainly wasn't a strike fund to provide people with food and money to cover their expenses during the time that they were striking. So these people who did this, they were hungry to do this. They were, severely uncomfortable, even to the point of being arrested and putting on chain gangs as consequence for asking for wages. As the strike went on, a small number of white women joined them. Those white women were also domestic laborers and washerwomen. The newspapers would, as an intimidation tactic, publish the names of the black women who were organizing and involved with the strike, but they did not publish the names of the white women to protect them. So that was clearly a tactic to intimidate and also a tactic to divide along racial lines. And, good for these people. They stuck together and realized that this wasn't about race, it was about wages. So they had a common goal, and they stuck together to get it accomplished. Eventually, what happened was the city of Atlanta was having a cotton expo. This was a big deal for them. They had a lot of fancy Yankee people, business people, coming to Atlanta to see that their agriculture had recovered and that their city was beautiful and fun to visit, because this was just 2 decades after the American Civil War, and Atlanta was pretty decimated. So they wanted to bring business back to Atlanta, where they would have lots of fancy Yankee people showing up who needed, what do they need? Their laundry done. They also need hotel rooms and meals. So the strike was going on, and the women said to the mayor what wages they wanted. The Atlanta City Council proposed a $25 business fee to anyone who was a part of the washing society. And their goal was to financially devastate these women, because $25 then would be like over $800 today. That's quite a lot. And these women were already not being paid fair wages. So that amount of money would have been, shockingly ridiculous. But the women had a plan. They went to the city council and said, fine, we will pay your $25, but we want full control of the washing women, the washer society. And the city council said, no, you can't have control of it. And the washing women said, bet. The Cotton Expo was about to happen, and they threatened a general strike. That means nothing would get done, because on board was also the people who would clean the hotel rooms and sweep the streets and light the lamps and watch the children and cook the meals and wash the dishes. And Atlanta was going to look like an absolute joke to these fancy business people coming down from wherever they were coming from, New York and other northern cities that were not as devastated as Atlanta was during the Civil War. So yeah, that is some leverage. And the Atlanta City Council relented, and the Washing Society was organized and stayed organized, and control of the wages was given to the Washing Society. The unity of these women, especially those who were carried off to be on a chain gang as a punishment for asking for wages to live comfortably, the unity that they had is astounding to me. It's impressive and something to be inspired by, I think. And I also want to say that there have been, marches and protests and things that have been organized. I'm specifically thinking of the Women's March lately. I am talking about Black women who know the things that need to be done, like who's getting the permits. If you have people who culturally know how to organize protests because they've had to, they've been forced to for decade after decade after decade, rely on that expertise, because it is expertise. Just wanted to throw that in there as a little sentiment, just something I've noticed. It's not hard to notice, just look around. Yeah, so let's get back to Black history in textiles, but let's go to some more recent history. If you're interested in learning more about labor movements in the United States, I have 2 books that I highly recommend. The first one is called Young and Restless: The Girls Who Sparked America's Revolutions by Maddie Kahn, and the other one is called Fight Like Hell: The Untold History of American Labor by Kim Kelly. I don't know if many people realize this, but the labor movements and the history regarding the labor movements in the United States was actively censored from school curriculum before 1970, and it wasn't really emphasized after that. So this is history that everyone should be aware of. That magazine back there, if you were part of that whole fiasco, is going to bring back some memories. It has been frustrating to see the way that some people get upset about Black women existing in the knitting community and the fiber art community, I should say. The basic thing that I want to say here is that we shouldn't be scared of history. We shouldn't exclude people because of the color of their skin. Are we still doing this in the year of our Lord 2025? Because yeah, we are. It's happening. In fact, it's accelerating. It's even worse now. Like DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion is bad and deserving of retribution from the government? No, that is not what this flag behind me stands for. And I don't get very political in a lot of my videos because it's just not, specifically relevant. But I also want to say that textiles are inherently political. The flag behind me is a textile. Who knits is political. Who doesn't knit is political. I mean, who does the labor of our clothes, the sewing, the harvesting, the growing of the cotton, of the jeans that we wear today? Who's affected by the damage to the climate that fast fashion is doing? And on and on and on. All of these things are political, and they are all relevant, and they are all part of fiber arts and textiles. And I just want to say that I'm not going to stop including people. If it's history I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about it. And I just want to be very clear that to me, when I look at that flag, when I look at that blue, I see the history of indigo and its roots go back to Africa. And I don't think it's bad to actually learn real history. Like, if you're really uncomfortable with that history, maybe do some self-reflection to figure out why. It's you know, a lot of it is sad, and a lot of it is horrific, but it happened. Like that doesn't change the fact it happened. And part of healing from damage that's been done is to acknowledge the damage and learn from it so that it doesn't happen again. And I'm not sure why, but it just seems like the United States has a long-time culture of not learning from history. And as a teacher, as an educator, as a citizen, that breaks my heart. So I know that this was a little bit of a different video, but I thought that these things were important to talk about and share, and to make my position on these things very clear. So if that's upsetting to you, if you want to call me woke, that's fine, but I'm going to ask you to define woke in the comments before you say that I'm woke. I want to be sure that we're using that term the same way. If you're interested in learning more about Black women and women of color in the fiber arts community, I recommend this book. It is called This Long Thread, Women of Color on Craft, Community, and Connection by Jen Hewitt. You can find it on used bookstore sites. It is currently out of print. This is a collection of interviews and essays and artist profiles. And it has a lot of just really interesting reflections and perspectives, and I think that this is also a very valuable book that anyone in the fiber arts community would do well to read. So, a happy Black History Month, everyone. That Black history is happy because there's wonderful Black history, and it's also sad. But that's not exclusive to Black history. White people were there making it a sad time. Like, that's also my history. That's our history. So, that's important to remember. All right, friends. I'll see you in the next one. Happy spinning. Michelle!